It's not real capitalism. There's no hard money in it. It's theft of hard money through fake capitalism, through a debt-based Ponzi scheme. People think the problem is the government. You have this perpetual cycle that's guaranteed to completely bankrupt the people, bankrupt the corporation, and bankrupt the government. The financial industrial complex controls everything. Every Senate member, every Congress member are all controlled by corporate interest. But eventually there's going to be civil unrest when you steal all the assets from all the people. They want everybody to own Bitcoin in custody, but they want to own Bitcoin in self-custody. The things that they want you to do are the opposite of what you should be doing. Bitcoin is still the only shot we got, but that's not a guarantee still. We have to understand the attack vectors. Wall Street can use Bitcoin in order to maintain its power structure. And it will, and it has, and it's too late already. I promise you, this isn't getting better. This gets worse.
Mr. Simon Dixon, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
So I think you were on What Bitcoin Did years and years ago, weren't you?
Yeah, I think I did one with Bill
Peter.
Barheit.
That's right, yeah.
And Peter, yeah.
So that's when I was still behind the scenes. This is the first time I've actually met you, so very nice to meet you.
Yeah, you're taller than I thought.
Yeah, I get that one a lot. But I know you've been in Bitcoin a very long time, but you've been really blowing up recently with your sort of latest iteration of the things you're talking about. Do you want to start off with just a bit of an introduction, explain who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I was part of, before I was in the Bitcoin community, I was in the monetary reform community. And so I used to work in investment banking. I did the full suite of being a market maker on the trading floor, the London Stock Exchange, being a corporate finance, helping companies go public. And also I did stockbroking, so understanding stocks and shares, market moves, pretty much manipulation. And in 2006, I joined the monetary reform community and decided to throw in the corporate towel and just go full-time teaching about the problems with banks, understanding how money is created, and just really diving deep into how fiat currencies are backed by war and violence. At the time, it was quite controversial because the Bank of England hadn't actually released much around money creation papers other than the charters and various other things. So I went around all the different universities across London, and I did some in the States as well. Got chucked out of London School of Economics, University College of London, Birkbeck University, because
That's how
I
you
was
doing things right.
Exactly, just telling people how banks, create money every time they issue a loan. And at that time, it was a bit of a conspiracy theory. And so, but then the financial crisis happened. So my talks got really popular around 2007, 2008, and then started to try and do some work with the UK government in terms of reforms of banking. I realized that was a dead end because the government is owned by the banks. And so I started to really understand how the political process worked. And so I decided, okay, rather than try and persuade the government that's owned by the banks to reform the way banking is created, why don't we create a bank how we think a bank should be created? And so we came up with this concept of Bank to the Future at that time. We applied for a banking license at the Bank of England. And we were told that we could not create a full reserve bank. We had to build a bank on top of an existing bank. And we needed 60 million at the Bank of England in order to continue with the application. We recruited the team that built Metro Bank in order to build it with us. And even with all that team and they managed to secure a license for the first time in 100 years with the Bank of England. If you wanted to do full reserves and allow people to own their money, allocate how they want their money, and have an account with the Bank of England, it was impossible.
So that's the same thing that Caitlin Long's been struggling with in the US. Like she wasn't able to get, was it a Fed charter she couldn't get because it was a fully reserved bank?
Yeah, so Custodia wanted a Federal Reserve account. They wanted full reserves. They didn't want to hypothecate. I went through the exact same experience in the Bank of England.
So why is being a full reserve bank such a threat to the financial system? Why won't they allow that to happen?
Well, in a nutshell, because banks have a monopoly on the creation of fiat currency. and it's a Ponzi scheme. So if you want to, create £1,000, if you don't have a banking license, you go to prison. But if you have a banking license, then you have the ability to create a digital currency every time you issue a loan. And so you create £1,000, and then you charge an interest on that. Now, the first transaction was William Patterson with King Charles in 1694 at the Bank of England for £1.2 million. But it came with interest. The only challenge is the money to repay the interest doesn't exist. And so the only way to get the money to repay the interest is to persuade somebody else to take on a loan. And so you have this perpetual cycle that's guaranteed to completely bankrupt the people, bankrupt the corporation, and bankrupt the government.
So it was a Ponzi from day one.
It's a Ponzi from day one. And that's how the Bank of England, when it created this model, was created. And that was the transition to the Federal Reserve in 1913 after 2 attempts to do that. So what we're witnessing today is inevitable, predictable, guaranteed. And so because the money doesn't actually exist to repay the loan, if you create a full reserve bank, then you would have an outflow, almost like imagine a stable coin right now, which is essentially backed by government debt in full reserves. If you allowed for you to exchange your bank deposit, which is fractional reserves in a Ponzi scheme, for full reserves, where you essentially own the asset, the government debt that backs the stable coin, you'd have a massive outflow of money from the fractional reserve system to the full reserve system. And so that is the issue. You break the banking system if you do full reserve. And so they will not allow you to do full reserves. And what they did say in the end, they said, if you put 60 million at the Bank of England, we will give you the ability to do full reserves as long as you build it on top of a clearing bank. And so if we built it on Barclays Bank, then essentially we would have full reserves, we would pay, and Barclays would be able to fractionally reserve.
So you don't fix anything.
So you don't fractionally reserve, you just give the ability to rehypothecate to the bank you build on top of.
So they make all the money on the deposits.
Exactly, yeah. So, that was the compromise. And then they actually turned that into an innovation in the UK. They called it the challenger banks. And so we had like Zopa from peer-to-peer lending. We had all these different companies create the whole challenger bank, Revolut, all these different companies. And that was built upon that original application that we made with the Bank of England.
So I want to know what it meant to be a monetary reform person pre-Bitcoin, because there was obviously the End the Fed movement in the US. Was there a End the Bank of England movement here?
No, there was a little meeting that happened every year in Birmingham called the Bromsgrove meeting. And it was a bunch of old pensioners. And I've got some of the original recordings when I would go and present to them. And I remember there were times when there was like the Obama campaign. I was telling people about social media and how you can get this message out. And there's a bunch of pensioners, and they see someone that understands technology. Is like I was the youngest person in the community at that time. But yeah, we would meet every year, and there would be people like MP Steve Baker used to come. And there would be people that had written books, but it was very much, how do we return to a gold standard?
Yeah.
And I would say that actually the gold standard isn't the solution either. And so we would understand this concept of how to actually print money. And inevitably, when anyone ever understands this, you go back through the times when money was created, backed by labor, various other things. You study the Weimar Republic, controversial subject, because you realize that, forget about all the controversial history around Hitler, but he was a monetary reformer. And so he arrested the Rothschilds, closed the central bank, and implemented a labor-backed currency. And that took unemployment to zero. It took inflation to zero. And it was only when he started printing money to fight for war that it went into the destruction phase. And then it was backed by gold, because every time he invaded a country like Czechoslovakia,
take the gold.
The Bank for International Settlements would change the label on the drawer and say, this is not Czechoslovakia's gold, this is Germany's gold. And so, that was able to elongate the process. But it was only when Hitler started printing money for non-productive use that you ended up with, so when it went to war, that's when you get in the challenge, and then the banks come along, they co-opt the system, and then they lend you the money. And so essentially it was, how do you print money for productive use? And then you end up in things like social banking, community banking, as long as you can do it interest-free. And then what's the model, and what are the historical models? That's what our conversation looked like. And then you'd compare that to gold-backed currencies and the gold standard.
With fiat money constantly debasing, wealth preservation isn't optional. That's why I recommend Swan Bitcoin, a team of dedicated Bitcoiners who work with families and businesses to build and secure generational wealth with Bitcoin. Strong relationships with clients are at the center of everything Swan does. A dedicated Swan Private Wealth representative, which is a real person that you can text and call, will help you build a Bitcoin wealth strategy using Swan's comprehensive platform of Bitcoin services, including tax-advantaged retirement accounts, advanced Bitcoin cold storage using collaborative self-custody, inheritance planning with both trust and entity accounts, tax loss harvesting, asset-backed loans, and more. Swan have helped over 100,000 clients since 2020, and if you're serious about acquiring and securing Bitcoin, I recommend Swan. Meet the team at swan.com/WBD, which is SWAN.com/WBD. If you already self-custody your Bitcoin, you know the deal with hardware wallets. Complex setups, clumsy interfaces, and a seed phrase that can be lost, stolen, or forgotten. Well, Bitkey fixes that. Bitkey is a multi-sig hardware wallet built by the team behind Square and Cash App. It packs a cryptographic recovery system and built-in inheritance feature into an intuitive, easy-to-use wallet with no seed phrase to sweat over. It's simple, secure self-custody without the stress. And Time named Bitkey one of the best inventions of 2024. Get 20% off at bitkey.world when you use the code WBD. That's bitkey.world and use the code WBD. This episode is brought to you by AnchorWatch. The thing that keeps me up at night is the idea of a critical error with my Bitcoin cold storage. And this is where AnchorWatch comes in. With AnchorWatch, your Bitcoin is insured with your own A+ rated Lloyd's of London insurance policy, and all Bitcoin is held in their time-locked multi-sig vaults. So you have the peace of mind knowing your Bitcoin is insured while not giving up custody. So whether you're worried about inheritance planning, rent attacks, natural disasters, or just your own silly mistakes, you're protected by AnchorWatch. Rates for fully insured custody start as low as 0.55% and are available for individual and commercial customers located in the US. Speak to AnchorWatch for a quote and for more details about your security options and coverage. Visit anchorwatch.com today. That is anchorwatch.com.
So you think that there should be an amount of money printing?
Well, the conclusion was, if you look at the different schools of thoughts, it's quite interesting because there was something called, the organization I was a part of was called Positive Money. It's still around today in the UK. And that came from the company I created at the time. There was a few offshoots. And at the first Positive Money conference, there were three main presentations. One of them was a guy called Richard Werner. And Richard Werner was the guy that created the concept of quantitative easing.
Okay.
Proved in a white paper that banks create money through the credit creation process. And then wrote a paper stating that as long as money is printed in order to go into the productive economy, and you have a network of community banks, then as long as the growth that is generated from that money printing supersedes any interest, and you can also do non-usury based models without interest as well, then that is the optimum way to achieve money that doesn't, that creates the full employment, and also doesn't have the inflationary impact. And so Richard Werner created that whole model. Now, interestingly, we went in a few different directions. The other person was a guy called Ben Dyson, who was the founder of Positive Money. He worked for me at the time and then created this organization. And he now actually ended up working for the Bank of England on their central bank digital currency project, and then left in order to work for Enbridge for the Bank for International Settlements, and now works on that project of these global central bank digital currencies. So we had, Richard Werner, that was the guy that proved credit creation. Then there was Ben Dyson that went down the CBDC route. And then at that point, I realized that this bank was never going to be approved. Mm-hmm. I wanted to demonstrate how monetary reform could work. And I became bankrupt. So I spent all of my savings. My wife backed us. She left her career at Barclays. She was working. I left my career in investment banking. We were full-time doing this roadshow of presentations. And we were deep in debt, because when you work in investment banking, you take on debt in order to meet your, your environment at the time.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you lose your job and you realize, holy shit, I got a load of debt, no income. I'm trying to fund a business. And you get trapped into, the Silicon Valley raising finance and all that stuff. You almost get sucked into the, what I call the financial industrial complex. But anyway, back to that. I decided that I was going to write a book. And so I wrote the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin. And it was called Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. I wrote that in 2010 when I was in the midst of this. And it came out in 2011. And halfway through publishing it, I got a message from somebody that was part of the Positive Money community. And he messaged me, and his name was Johnny Bitcoin. And Johnny Bitcoin said, "Hey, Simon, I've moved to this squat in Old Street, and there's a bunch of developers here that are working on this project called Bitcoin. And I've sold my house, and I've put all my money in Bitcoin as the future of money. Do you want to come check it out?"
Let's go, Johnny Bitcoin.
Yeah. So I said, okay, sure. I'm writing a book. Let's see. Because I was trying in the book to find a way. It actually predicted central bank digital currencies before that was a term. It also went through the concept of technology is going to lead to this social credit system. Mm-hmm. And so, building your social capital is going to be the commodity of the future. And then it went through how to transition the Bank of England and what the world would look like if you had monetary reform. And we time traveled back to the future into all the different moments when the Bank of England was upgraded to the system we have today. And so Johnny Bitcoin messaged me. And then, came to visit him and met a guy called Amir Taki.
I mean, I've obviously heard, I've never met Amir, but I've heard lots about him.
And he was kind of the face for Bitcoin at the time.
Yeah.
And so there was a deliberate tarnishing campaign around Bitcoin. This is like Silk Road time, pre-Silk Road. They wanted to connect everything to drugs. And so Amir Taki was in the squat, and they invited the BBC to the squat. Huh. And he was like, you know what's great about Bitcoin? You can do money laundering. The government doesn't control anything.
He's a pretty
I can buy
eccentric
drugs.
character.
And he was kind of that exactly what the BBC wanted in terms of the face of Bitcoin at the time. But anyway, he invited me to the first Bitcoin conference in Prague. And at that time, I spoke at the conference in Prague. And the price of Bitcoin, crashed from $30 to $3. And then bought a bunch of Bitcoin at $3 at the conference. And there was the physical Bitcoin guys. There was this little hackathon where they hacked together a Bitcoin vending machine, bought a Mars bar for $1 at the conference. And there were various other people there. I met Max Kaiser. It was sponsored by Mt. Gox. There was a guy pitching his startup for the PayPal of Bitcoin called Tony Galippi, called BitPay. And what we decided to do from that moment is, okay, right. I was ready to hear the pitch of Bitcoin. I was ready to read the white paper because I was coming it from the perspective of failing to create a bank, not being able to get the license to create a bank. And so I realized, okay, this solves the fundamental problems. This is money you can own.
You don't need a bank.
You don't need a bank. Money you can spend. And a monetary policy that nobody can change. Mm-hmm. And so I was very receptive to the message, not because I was, okay, this is the future. I was desperate, so I wanted to create this bank. We were broke, we were about to go bankrupt. And so this felt like the technology. And so we put our money into Bitcoin. Our last bit of credit card went to going to that conference. And then Bitcoin performed and just started deciding to invest in the different companies. And so we took the concept of Bank to the Future and we pivoted to equity crowdfunding. And we funded many of the major multi-billion-dollar unicorns before any venture capitalist would look, from Coinbase to Kraken to Bitfinex to Bitstamp, Exodus, Circle, And we just managed to invest and get in the early rounds of all of these different companies.
Very cool. So from those early days, you obviously saw Bitcoin as this revolutionary thing. Are you happy with where it is today?
I am amazed at where Bitcoin is today. The fact that Bitcoin got this far is a miracle. But throughout the whole journey, Bitcoin has always been under attacks. And so I try to warn people about the latest set of attacks that happen. And people interpret that as, oh, right, that means you're bearish on Bitcoin. No, Bitcoin, it's kind of like, we've said upon, like, people talk about the US Constitution and, this governance document that people respect around the world because it has the separation of executive, Senate, and, for law and judicial. Bitcoin has the same type of thing. You have miners, you have nodes, and you have open source code. And all three of those are subjected to attack vectors that could be centralized. But as long as all three commit to becoming more and more decentralized, there's moments when each one becomes more centralized. And so we have to warn about those attack vectors before all three become centralized. And so people kind of interpret that as I'm always warning people about all the different attack vectors because I've seen it from the beginning as an investor, as a shareholder in most of the major companies, from when they were all just Bitcoin companies to now crypto scammers and companies I will sell the second I can, but they're all going public right now. So I'm able to do that. Bitcoin is still the only shot we got. It's the most decentralized thing we got. The answer isn't, okay, let's look at another shitcoin. Let's look at another hard fork. Let's look at something else. Bitcoin is still the answer. But that's not a guarantee still. And so we have to respect the network. We have to understand the attack vectors. But am I happy with where Bitcoin is today? I'm amazed we ever got this far. And yeah, it's a miracle.
So what do you see as the biggest threat to Bitcoin right now?
The latest attack vector is centralization via what I call the financial industrial complex. And so in all my background of having been involved in investment banking, trading, investing in venture capital, running a business that never needed funding. So, we did the treasury company. So I got out of my debt through Bitcoin by making sure that I was saving it and not spending it all. Our company we remained private. We never needed Silicon Valley money. We built many, many assets. We built a Bitcoin balance sheet, and we never needed to go public. And so we avoided all the attack vectors that the financial industrial complex uses in order to co-opt you, which is Silicon Valley, venture capital, private equity, bank loans, investment banking, securitization, financialisation, and now tokenization. We managed to avoid all of those attack vectors that get somebody co-opted into just becoming, almost like a collateralized debt obligation for this financial industrial complex. And so from that, I try to warn people, because I managed to avoid all of that, what the biggest risk is. And so, that's kind of gets a bit of, takes us to the next topic, really.
Well, yeah, because over the last couple of years, since ETFs launched, and then there was obviously the Trump campaign and then becoming president, and the idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, like Wall Street getting more involved, banks now potentially getting involved in Bitcoin in terms of custody and things like that. There's this sort of narrative that Wall Street can co-opt Bitcoin. And then the kind of firmly held Bitcoiner belief is that Bitcoin can be a Trojan horse into the financial system, and it's this incorruptible force. Where do you sit on all that?
Wall Street can use Bitcoin in order to maintain its power structure. And it will, and it has, and it's too late already. So to me, people think that Bitcoin takes out all fiat currencies. I think the reason that people come to that conclusion is because they don't understand power dynamics in the world. And I've always tried to express having contemplated this subject for 25 years with direct experience. People think the problem is the government. The government isn't actually the problem. It's the conclusion I've come to. Remember what I said? I was trying to persuade the government that was owned by the banks to change banking. Actually, it is government that has been completely co-opted by corporate interest. People still think there is a political solution. And so I find people thinking, change the administration, go left, right, go to Trump administration. Like, it's an absolute waste of time. Because when you understand the structure of how the world works, you realize actually it's corporate, large multinational corporate interest.
Why? Because of things like lobbying and...
Okay, so let's take an example. So we are on currently, the world reserve currency is the dollar. So I call this a proof of weapons network. I stole it from proof of work. And the reason I call it proof of weapons is because most people think of the dollars backed by, the military industrial complex. It was. It's not anymore. What the proof of weapons network does is a world reserve currency is not natural. It's not like something the world decides that the dollar is the least inflationary currency and therefore we all want to use dollars. No, firstly, it was backed by financial cooperation between the Bank of England and the Fed, a change of world order that required wars. And then at the end of that became the Bretton Woods system, which required institutions to force the world onto a dollar standard. That was the IMF, the World Bank, and a previous institution, the Bank for International Settlements. And so between World War I and World War II, you had the Bank for International Settlements that was set up to manage the reparations of Germany from the First World War. And all debts had to be settled in gold. And during World War I, there were several changes in world order in order to consolidate the world's gold. The first was Wall Street firstly funded World War I. You think like it was England versus Germany, with Russia and France. It was actually the Bank of England, which was set up in order to bankrupt the UK government through funding perpetual wars in the GBP Ponzi scheme.
Wait, when you say it was set up to this, what do you mean?
Well, the original transaction of the Bank of England was to fund the Battle of Waterloo between England and France. And then obviously at the end of that, you had the rise of the Rothschild Empire because they managed to get so much government debt by manipulating the bond markets and saying that, France had won. Everybody started selling down all the UK government debt and the Rothschild family bought it all. You got all these legendary stories. But if you look at the start of the Bank of England, you had a government that had virtually no debt. And then they took it to the end of a debt cycle, which was World War I. And so you eventually bankrupt the UK government. People think of the institutions as one, like the government. No, you have a private organization, which is now nationalized, but the same structure. And that's because of the Fed structure. And this is where people don't quite get it. The Bank of England, their job is to roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And the most useful mechanism for doing that is the UK government. And so if you can fund both sides of wars, then you can hedge every bet. And you can create this central banking empire that was created to fund wars in a debt-based Ponzi scheme that inevitably, predictably, and guaranteed bankrupts the government because you have, the only way to get this debt to pay off the interest that doesn't exist is you get consumer debt, you get corporate debt, and then the corporate debt can co-opt the government and you get government debt. And so you had this system that was built through the Bank of England. And what was the partnership? It was the Dutch East India Company partnering with the Bank of England. Sorry, the British East India Company before we had the Dutch. The British copied it from the Dutch. But the Bank of England was the one that got it really in check. And so what do? You use government debt, you privatize it through the British East India Company, And the Bank of England is the one that receives the interest on the debt and is the shareholder in the money creation system. And so you have all these banks that create the pound. You have the Bank of England that buys the government debt. You have the reallocation into corporate interest, which is the British East India Company. And then what do they do with the British East India Company? They invest in the military industrial complex. And so they built out the naval fleets. And then they do mercantilism. And mercantilism is you go to India and you steal all their gold. You go to China, get them addicted to opium, steal all their silver. You go to Africa and you destroy their currency, steal all their resources, and build a transatlantic slave trade to build Britain. And so you take all these different mercantile, and what you're essentially doing is you're taking a shitcoin, funding the war, and then exchanging it for the hard asset that you want, which is the gold, the silver, and the hard money. And so the British Empire was built upon that. So there was, once you've bankrupted the UK government, you know, the same banking families that created the first central bank, the second central bank in America, set about creating the Federal Reserve, which was a partnership between the Warburg families, the Morgan families, the Rockefeller families, and the Rothschild families. And what they did is they, you had the manufacturing base in Germany. You had Reichsbank, which was the German central bank. And in World War I, they set about making major changes. The first change was the funding of the Bolshevik Revolution, which was replacing the Russian Tsar with the communist Soviet Union. That was funded by Wall Street. And so the Bolsheviks were funded by Wall Street. So you have communism, which led to the Soviet Union. You have the installation of the central bank, 1910, and then the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, which is the Bank of England debt-based Ponzi scheme to bankrupt the US government. And so this was the same debt cycle that was set about in the US. And also it was the declaration of a Jewish state in Israel. And so what was that? The Bolsheviks were meant to get all the oil from Russia in 1917. But because they didn't get the oil from Russia, they ended up needing to destabilize the Middle East and get the oil from the Middle East. And so you had the Balfour Declaration, which is where the British government that was bankrupted during World War I would declare this Jewish state. They always the justification for all mercantilism is religion. It's not that they're religious. It's, Christian crusaders, safe home for the Jews, war on terror. This is the weaponization of religion. It's not about religion. Mm-hmm. And so they said about the destabilization of the Middle East via Rothschild, basically ethnic cleansing and settler colonializing through Israel into the Middle East. So you had Middle East, and then you had the war with Germany. Germany was the major manufacturing base. And so with all of those different operations, we ended the war in 1918. Then we went through the stock market manipulation, which was the Roaring '20s, where we got corporate interests and individuals in debt in US dollars, denominated in US dollars, through Wall Street by over-leveraging all of the assets, all of the Industrial Revolution assets, all of the funding, excessive bond creation, over-leveraging through excessive speculation. And then the Federal Reserve was able to manipulate a pump and dump cycle, crash the market, the '29 crash, accumulate all the assets. I'm missing a lot of history. We could go on forever, like with the 1907 JP Morgans and all that stuff. But you manipulate the goal is accumulation of assets. And so what did you have as we started to enter into, you had the Great Depression. That was the confiscation of all Americans' gold through executive order in 1933. You said anyone that has gold, hand it in to the Fed, and we'll give you a $20.67 shitcoin called a Federal Reserve note. And so confiscated all the gold there. And they needed to escalate to World War II in order to get Germany's gold. And a lot of the Russian gold ended up disappearing. So if you look at the end of World War II, the US essentially had this manufacturing base. We had a bankrupt UK government. We had the Federal Reserve, and we had, a massive population in America with vast access to resources. And the world moves around these resources. And so the transition was set between the Bank of England to the Federal Reserve. The Bank for International Settlements was the ledger for determining what gold was stored at the Bank of England, the Swiss Central Bank, and the Federal Reserve. And they could essentially change the ownership because there was no blockchain of gold at the time. And so through this process, the Bank for International Settlements, the governor of the Federal Reserve was Warburg, who was also on the board. His brother was on the board of Reichsbank in Germany, who was also determining where the gold would end up and who would own it through the Bank for International Settlements. And what did the Bank for International Settlements do? They later created the European Union. So you got the Bank for International Settlements. The gold is at the Bank of England and the Fed. You have this who owns the gold mercantilism is the world power. You have a manufacturing base, which is to take a debt-based Ponzi scheme and exchange it for all the gold through war, so that everyone ends up with the currency, but you end up with the gold. And it basically by the end of World War II, 75% of the world's gold was at the Fed or Fort Knox. It was meant to be owned by the American people, but it was actually collateralized by the banks. And so now you can't audit it right now because it appears on the Federal Reserve balance sheet and the Treasury's balance sheet because there's contracts against that gold that if the banks want it. Now, how did they set up the Federal Reserve? Well, they learned from the first two experiments where there was assassinations to end it and create it in the first place. Essentially, you ended up with the Fed shareholders. It was the same as the Bank of England model. Basically the Federal Reserve could buy government debt. The interest on the debt doesn't exist. And it was owned by the member banks. So you had these different states and you pretended it was decentralized across these 12 states. But who owned them? The member banks. It was the banks. And so you could become a shareholder in the member bank, and that gives you a banking license to create the dollar every time you issue a loan. And so you had this massive Ponzi scheme that was taken from England, and then he just said, right, let's change. Let's switch to America. Now let's bankrupt the US government. And then what did they do? They built the military-industrial complex, and they created this neo-colonial model. They said, right, Russia, I think we're going to enter into a Cold War. We're not going to settle our differences. We're not going to align. We need lots of war. And so you entered into the Cold War. And that led to the creation of NATO, United Nations, all the organizations that we have today. You had the subordination of Europe to America, which was the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was take our dollars and we will rebuild you, and then you can be on the side of capitalism. Fake capitalism, because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme. Mm-hmm. It's not real capitalism. There's no hard money in it. It's theft of hard money through fake capitalism, through a debt-based Ponzi scheme. And so they promised all the European countries, you were bankrupted. America managed to get through World War I and World War II, provide all the weapons, but not get bombed. Ended up with all the gold because they started issuing credit notes. The gold ended up settling. And you built this military-industrial complex that needed war to roll over the debt-based Ponzi. And so then what did Wall Street do? They started taking all of the resources of America and turning them into joint stock companies, i.e. public companies. And so you had the birth of this investment banking that were taking all the companies public. They would steal all the oil and they would privatize it. And then with the oil, they would hand it over to private interest. And so while countries in the Middle East were trying to keep their oil so that they didn't have to tax their people, if you go to Saudi or any of these Gulf countries, you don't pay tax. The funny thing is people think of, well, that's not capitalism, that's communism. No, that's an alternative to tax. They don't pay tax. Imagine how capitalist you can be when you don't pay any tax, right? And that's what the resources are for, but they frame it into these boxes and say, no, that's socialism. No, that's communism. But the reality is that the resources were being used to prop up private corporate interest. And so you actually had socialism for the corporate multinational corporation. You had this push towards globalism, but the peasants, they don't get any socialism. They just get debt and they become productized. And so if you can turn the people into debt slaves, then they become the labor force. And that labor force essentially becomes debt slaved for socialism for the corporate class. And so you had this birth of the military industrial complex. In order to force the world onto dollars, you needed the IMF. And so they created this neo-colonial mercantile model. And the model was you do it all through covert operations. You had the formation of the CIA at this time, which was a partnership between the Jewish mob, the Italian mafia, Nazi Germany, and America. And it was done through MI6. And you had Operation Paperclip and various other things. But through this partnership, the CIA was pitched as serving the national interest of the country. But at the time, corporate interests and national interests were pretty aligned. If you were based in America and you had an American manufacturing base, you were kind of representing the interest of America by creating GDP, by invading countries, bringing back, pushing the demand for dollars, bringing back those dollars into the country, and then they would lend them to the US government, and you create this concept of what we call a dollar milkshake theory, where everyone's, and so, that was the original model. But as the investment banking industry grew, they took all of those resources and companies public. And as they became more and more securitized and financialized, they started looking at how do we optimize our revenue? Well, globalization is the way we do it. And so suddenly it was like, well, where's the cheapest labor? We don't want to employ Americans. They're pretty expensive at the moment. And we've got them all addicted to shit food. They're getting obese. Through the petrochemical industry, we got them addicted to drugs. We got them addicted to all of these different things. The CIA was running all the drug trafficking operations, weapons trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking. They were funding all their black operations through allowing all the drugs to come in. They were creating these ghettos, getting people addicted to drugs. And so you had this whole...
So this is like crack epidemic of the 90s, is it? Or 80s and 90s?
This is a bit earlier. Okay. But yeah, you had all of the original... So if you look at Mossad, CIA, MI6, they've always run the drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, human trafficking, and sex trafficking operations. The reason for it is because they need off-balance sheet revenue. So an example is today, like America... when you want to fund an organization like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, which America does, by the way, then you need the oil of Syria, and you create an off-balance sheet oil field, which you can then use in order to fund the training camps, so that when you fund these militia groups in order to invade a country, then you can take over their resources. And the IMF was the organization in order to get the world addicted to dollars. The military-industrial complex had the CIA underneath it. CIA had all the covert operations. And so they would go around the world and create... the best book on this is like Operation Gladio by Paul Williams. You can see they created these militia groups all around the world, these stay-at-home armies. They call them terrorists today, but they're all funded by intelligence, Western intelligence. You create these stay-at-home armies that create chaos. And then what you do is you sanction a country so that they're economically starved. then you then, like if you look at Venezuela right now, if you look at the actual trade, you've got Chevron and Exxon that own the oil fields. Now, they sanction Venezuela so that the Venezuelan people can't benefit from the oil. But who's buying the oil? China. So you've got China buying Chevron and Exxon's oil, that they're building refineries. And so America wants the GDP because that's Chevron and Exxon. These are public companies. China's providing the GDP, buying the oil, but they want to make sure that the Venezuelan people can't get benefit from their own country's resources. Because then you can fund a color revolution, which is where you get the people to uprise, and then the CIA would start shooting people. And it looks like it's a dictator that's trying to fight back. But the dictator was installed by the CIA in the first place. And so you got all of these covert dictators that would privatize, financialize, and securitize the country's resources. They would then the IMF would come along and say, take our dollars. You are borrowing our dollars. And you have to do austerity on the people, and you have to privatize, financialize, and securitize all of your assets. And then you need to work with Chevron, Exxon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, JP Morgan, BlackRock.
So this is like the stuff that's, I mean, some of this is in things like Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Correct.
But the problem I have with stuff like this is when you say they, like who are the they behind this, who are trying to drive all of this?
Okay. So it's changed over time. And this is where let me go back to that proof of weapons network. Originally, it was fueled by a banking, a central banking model, a debt-based Ponzi scheme, and then the recycling of the currency to drive up debt into industry. And so the first was the military-industrial complex. Then you use that in order to push out all of this debt through the IMF. And the World Bank would, do these funding of loans. And the CIA would do the covert operations. And then you had a network of these banks plugged together. So remember I said Bank for International Settlements. The previous empire, the Bank of England, became less relevant. The Federal Reserve became really relevant. And who were the shareholders of the Bank for International Settlements? Any central bank that agreed to this neoliberal, quote-unquote, debt-based Ponzi scheme where your currency will become a weapon for our network. And so you print your currency, so it's more inflationary, and then you pay off your dollar loans, and then you lend it back to the US government by purchasing bonds, which comes with tied contracts to use our companies, which pushes our stock market. And so who is the main shareholder of the Bank for International Settlements and who's got the most vote is the Federal Reserve. Who's the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve is owned by the banks. The banks get to create the dollar. What are the banks now? Well, the banks are all public companies. So you can buy shares in JP Morgan, HSBC. So who are they? Well, they're public companies. They get to create the dollar. They created all the mortgage-backed securities through the investment banks. And then what happened next? Well, we created this index fund industry. We created this asset management industry where people said, I don't want to figure out what stocks to buy. You just buy them all for me. I'll get the S&P 500. All right, so now who is the S&P 500? Well, there's the 500 largest stocks. Who controls that? Well, it's an index fund. Well, who's the index fund? Where's that? That might be a Cayman Island corporation, or it might be, and who controls it? All right, well, that's BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Where do they get their money from? Oh, right, we're just paying our insurance premiums every month, and they get a load of money. I'm not buying any stocks. I just give them an index fund, and they get the money. And I'm paying into my pension, which is forced onto me by government mandate if I want a job. Oh, right, that's all going up to BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and the asset managers. And so what else is happening there? Well, so the asset managers own the banks. The banks are creating the fiat currency, and they have investment banks, and this is why I call it a financial industrial complex, which securitize and financialize every company. And what happens if you want to be in the network, the proof of weapons network, you have to take on corporate debt and you have to privatize and financialize and securitize your company. And we're going to buy you. And we get a board seat on your company. And you're an executive. So what is the structure of a company? You have the executives, they're the managers. You have the board, which the executives answer to, and the board represents the shareholders. So who are the shareholders? Well, the shareholders are the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world, which could be China, it could be Saudi Arabia, it could be Qatar, it could be UAE, it could be BlackRock, State Street, or Vanguard. And so the asset managers that are running all of the capital in the world get to subordinate every company. And so if you think about it, people think like, oh, Elon Musk, richest man in the world. No, he was DARPA funded, which is, Pentagon budget. So he's relied on Pentagon budget, manufactured as an entrepreneur in order to be given all of the military industrial complex technology, which he built Tesla and the social credit score and all this other type of stuff now. Now, so you create this valuable company.
What do you mean the social credit score there?
We'll get into that one. Okay. That's probably a deviation. I'll just try and get through this so we can understand the power structure of this proof of weapons network. So through this financialization and securitization, you can give people access to quantitative easing loans. You can manipulate the market through the derivatives market. You can seed all the entrepreneurs through venture capital in Silicon Valley. You can seed all the universities through MIT funding, all this different stuff. You can then make them public. And when they're public, their share price depends upon a few things. It depends upon money printing. It depends upon index fund, passive inflows of investment, and the media. Who owns the media? The proof of weapons network. Who did they install through Operation Mockingbird? The CIA are the talking heads. And so you can control the media is a public company that is a collateralized debt obligation of the banks and financial institutions owned by the asset managers. So when you go around this whole circle, you realize that the financial industrial complex controls everything. And so the military, which used to be the power with the deep state, i.e. CIA, but now they're subordinate to the banks because they're public companies and they require access to capital and funding. And the banks are subordinate to the asset managers. And so where we used to have with the British Empire, the British East India Company, today we have BlackRock, is a bit more decentralized. You got State Street, Vanguard is the private, all the old Rothschild money and all that type of stuff. BlackRock is the chosen one, as it were. And what did it do in its operations? Well, firstly, it created the most sophisticated data technology and artificial intelligence in the world. It's called Aladdin. It was used by the Federal Reserve during the 2008 financial crisis to determine which companies BlackRock got to buy and which companies JP Morgan got to buy. So it took out Bear Stearns.
So this is our AI overlord.
Yes, exactly. They were very early in the AI. Remember, this is military technology. They get the technology first. America is about privatizing. Europe is about nationalizing and making the government subordinate to the proof of weapons network. So when you see like fake fights between America and EU was a project from BIS. The number one shareholder is the Fed. The shareholder of the Fed is the banks. The banks are controlled by the asset managers. The military industrial complex underneath it has the deep state. The financial industrial complex determines whether you're allowed on the network or not. If you want to knock Elon off the network, you destroy his share price. Why? Because you said you get to buy Twitter, you get some golf money to buy it, and you get a loan from us against your stock. And if we want to knock your share price down, then we can margin call you and we are owned by you. You do our policy. You need to give the NSA a backdoor, which is for corporate interest, not government interest. And you turn all of these tech companies into algorithms that are feeding the military industrial complex that's controlled by the financial industrial complex. And so essentially, the military became subordinate to the financial industrial complex. The latest battle that we're witnessing right now in the proof of weapons network And there's more power structures, there's big pharma, there's all sorts of stuff. But for simplification, military industrial complex, financial industrial complex, who are in charge right now. But then the technical industrial complex came along and said, we need your money for now. But what if we can blackmail you through algorithm? What if we control intelligence through algorithm? What if we control financial markets through manipulation of algorithms? What if money's not that important in the future and it's actually all about control? And so now you had this AI social credit score. And with the Trump administration, you kind of had this multi-decade transition that we're going through right now. He installed the mafia into the Trump administration.
What do you mean?
You
by
had
that? It's actually the mafia.
Elon Musk, so the PayPal mafia, let's call it. Elon Musk, which is pretending to be the hero, while he takes all of that Pentagon budget and military technology and builds surveillance through your cars, surveillance through X and your social media, access to DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. Remember, you can't pay down the national debt.
Yeah.
Anybody that says you can pay down the national debt is lying to you. And so
And do you think Elon knew that before he
yes,
started?
he knew that. Of course he knew that. He's subordinate to the financial industrial complex. No politician is in charge unless they're compromised. That's the rule. That's what Jeffrey Epstein was.
Wait, before we do Epstein, because I feel like that's a whole other rabbit hole we can go down.
Yeah.
You make Elon sound evil in this.
Not evil, subordinate. You do not rise to power unless you agree to the agenda of the financial industrial complex.
But so again, I know you're saying, like, when I said who are the they, it's the sort of asset managers at the top of this. Who are they? Do we know?
It changes based upon wealth. And so you can buy America in the West if you've got enough money. So who really rules the world? Sovereign wealth. Anybody that resisted the central bank. If you got the central bank and you privatized your oil and your resources, and now semiconductor chips is an important part of it, if you managed to keep that, then you were able to negotiate with the proof of weapons network. If you submitted to that because you were victimized by war, dictator, sanctions, submitted to government dollar debt, then you became a token, a shitcoin for the proof of weapons network. And any company that goes public, anyone that has Silicon Valley money, anybody that takes on the excessive debt against by collateralizing their financial instruments, they are dependent upon the financial industrial complex to survive. And so while you have these, Elon's the example with the social credit score, David Sachs is doing the crypto policy. What's he doing? He's stable coins with yield through the Genius Act, doing the whole tokenize everything, real world assets. He's doing that part, one of the other PayPal guys. And he was the third PayPal guy, Peter Thiel. So Peter Thiel, he's essentially turned the military industrial complex into cybersecurity and artificial intelligence.
With Palantir.
Palantir did the technology behind genocide as a service in Gaza, occupation as a service in West Bank, drone integration in Ukraine, closed border, open border in America in order to integrate with ICE, the privatized military, the border deportations, the privatized prisons in El Salvador, what else did he do? The data in the UK that built the pre-crime arrest based upon social media posts, the European Union civil unrest, invasions by, weaponizing religion. All of these integrations were done with data that Elon secured that has been tokenized and will be financialized through blockchains, through David Sachs. And Palantir is basically the warfare, the cybersecurity, the pre-crime surveillance state that will integrate into the central bank digital currencies and stable coins and tokenize real world assets.
You think this is all part of their game plan?
Absolutely. The next power structure is the technical industrial complex. The technical industrial complex may not need money because you can access money through data, through blackmail operations.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Because I do want to talk about the Epstein thing, because you brought him up a little earlier. You were saying that's what Epstein was. What do you think he was? A Mossad agent?
No. Epstein was manufactured, from my perspective, by the military industrial complex. It's not impossible for a single human to have those access to those networks without a multi-decade institution. He had a global network. He was networked into all of the sovereign wealth funds, the leaders, the Arab leaders. He was networked into the entire Israeli infrastructure. People think that Israel rules the world. Israel is subordinate, just like anyone else. Netanyahu privatized most of Israeli assets for the financial industrial complex. The job of any compromised president is to hand over all assets, not to the people, but to the corporate interest. He was connected into Mossad, CIA, MI6. They have their power struggles, but they're kind of one thing. This is how do you create all these covert wars and operations? And the idea is anybody that rises to power, once you take that first Silicon Valley check or go public or that bank loan or that QE money, you do not get access to that money unless we have a certain level of compromise on you. So what the Jeffrey Epstein network is all of the lobby class, all of the financiers, all of the tech bros, all of the innovation. And Jeffrey Epstein was just the latest one. Prior to that, there was Roy Cohn and Charles Kushner, who married into the Trump family via Jared Kushner. Prior to that, you had Meyer Lansky. And so this blackmail operation has just been handed over. And probably the next one is Peter Thiel's and people like that. I don't know. Elon Musk might even be the guy. But you don't this is in order to rise to power in the network, in order to mutually guarantee that it survives, you do not rise unless you are compromised. And if we can't compromise you, we force compromise. And the one that they needed to get, the one they needed to get rid of was JFK, because he took on the military industrial complex. So it is a private network that represents military industrial complex. Subordinate to military is CIA, Mossad, MI6, Five Eyes intelligence networks. Their job is to steal money from the people and hand it over to the corporate interest to rise the stock market so that you can get higher GDP, make sure that it gets reloaned to the US government, and then that US government budget through lobby gets reallocated back up to the corporate to prop up the stock market. And so it is the biggest debt-based Ponzi scheme theft. And you either end up, in the end, you end up you either an asset because you're in debt of the network, or you're compromised and you get to rise to the top of the network. And the more you compromise, the higher you get to go.
I've got two questions there. Do you think P. Diddy was one?
Yes.
And then, more important question, why do you know this?
I study declassified CIA documents and I read a book a week. Most of this is known and understood because there's been whistleblowers, but people just don't have the time to care. And so because Bitcoin gave me freedom, because I've been obsessed with the study of money and what props up these world reserve currencies, I just read I read the Bank Charter Acts. I read the declassified document. You can read a book called Covert Regime Change. It will go through the last 100 operations of covert regime change that were all from declassified CIA documents. All of this information is available, but the algorithm probably doesn't give it to you or suppresses it if they don't want you to have it. But you can get this information. And I just follow the money. That's all I do. And so because I gave myself a discipline of going for the last 10 years of going live every week and following the money in Bitcoin and tech, following the money in macro, and following the money in geopolitics. And it forced me to follow the money, which is the complete opposite of what politicians are telling you. And so it came to my understanding after all of this that power is sovereign wealth, those that kept their central bank independent and kept their resources, and the proof of weapons network. And the entire West, Canada, UK, EU, America, Israel, Australia, is subordinate to this, the proof of weapons network, negotiating with sovereign wealth.
So is this like rise of the BRICS nations and the more sort of multipolar world we're going into a threat to this system?
No. Where did BRICS first come from? It was popularized by Goldman Sachs. This is the key thing. Now, the military-industrial complex was kind of nationalistic. The financial-industrial complex was global. So they will go wherever returns go. So if you're BlackRock and you're witnessing that you've extracted all assets from UK, you've extracted all assets and power from EU, you've extracted all assets and power from US, you then take the tactics that you used abroad to destroy the Middle East in forever wars, to subject Africa to theft of all their resources, to take the global South and Asia, and you bring them home. And so that's when they started using immigration policy in order to destabilize the region so that they could acquire everything. And if you look at every negotiation right now of privatization of assets, you've got BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, the Gulf countries, and China acquiring everything. And so we are the proof of weapons network is not saying I'm America first, I'm UK first, I'm EU first. They're saying, how do I manage my portfolio? Birth rates are destroyed. People are addicted to drugs. The governments can't serve the people. People are having uprisings. You know, we had COVID, which was the largest wealth transfer to the technical industrial complex. They're starting to deconstruct everything that propped up the dollar. They're breaking the petrodollar. They're breaking the currency pegs. They're breaking the Japan carry trade. They're breaking the euro dollar. They're putting a commodity bull market. They're trying to centralize as much Bitcoin as possible, brings us into, current operations. But they are doing exactly what they did, the Bank of England did, to create the Federal Reserve. Now, who is the next handover? Well, it actually turns out that if you look at BlackRock, remember what I said? It's fluid. As power changes, as wealth changes, you get new affiliations. They managed to persuade Saudi Arabia to take a percentage of their oil, Saudi Aramco, and make it public. They only did a little percentage because they know what that means. And they got a board seat on BlackRock. And so now Saudi Arabia is important in the network. What do? They started aligning with all the other Gulf countries and formed a union to decolonize and de-dollarize. Now, what happened to America? America stopped. They invented fracking, and they became energy exporters. Now they compete with the Gulf countries. So where's the Gulf countries' sovereign wealth coming from? China. So the Gulf countries are funded by China.
Buying the oil.
Because China's built the largest oil reserves in the world because they have the actual manufacturing base and the weak currency. And they're going around and said, hey, we're going to reverse the IMF. We're going to do the Belt and Road Initiative. And so they said, while America is doing colored revolution, installing dictators, destroying your country, stealing your resources, pretending that they're exporting democracy, we just want you to buy our stuff, and we'll allow you to have some of your resources. We'll invest in your factories. Across Mexico is lots of Chinese factories. They allow them to build up their factory, use their labor, keep some of their resources, as long as they, send it back to China. China then builds up, the manufacturing base, exports to the world. And they said, America's buying 15% of our goods. We want you to buy them instead. So Iran, why don't we build you up? Russia, why don't we build you up? Africa, why don't we build you up? Asia, why don't we build you? Look, they're not, they're doing it for their own self-interest, but they're reversing the IMF through building infrastructure rather than destroying competition. And everyone then split into blocks because the proof of weapons network is BlackRock's looking at their balance sheet saying, where's the birth rates? Where's the labor? Only Africa and the Middle East are having children. Everyone else is declining. We need AI, we need robotics everywhere else. And we need the labor where the resources are. Goldman Sachs came up with this concept of BRICS. What did they try to do? They tried to co-opt the global South and Asia the same way the Bank for International Settlements co-opted the European Union. They said, why don't you do a single currency? Yeah. So the ECB was essentially the mechanism for transferring all of Europe's wealth over to America and buying all of its energy, which is why the Russia-Ukraine war was not a war between Russia and Ukraine. It was a war between the US proof of weapons network and Europe. They destroyed the manufacturing base. They turned off the nuclear energy. They blew up Nord Stream pipeline.
You think that was the US?
Of course it was. This is the proof of well, it's not. The US is not sovereign. It's controlled by global corporate interest. So the US stock market, you could think about it more of, it's the proof of weapons network. The government is controlled by the lobby. The government does not do policy for the American people. The government's job is to create a narrative that doesn't lead to civil unrest of why they're stealing so much money, printing so much money, and handing it over to the large corporates because every Senate member, every Congress member, and through the deep state judicial are all controlled by corporate interest. And we're led to believe they just want you to not think, they want you to think that our government, and this is why people are so frustrated with politics. They're like, how could you do this?
Why does nothing change?
Why does nothing change? Because you're looking at the wrong place. The politicians are subordinate to corporate interest. If you want to vote, you don't vote a politician. Like left, right is the same thing. Conservative, Labour, same thing. Republican, it's just a distraction to give you a new flavor to believe that this is how you make change. And it never changes because you vote with your money. The only thing that the proof of weapons network cares about is money.
Bleak. This is a bleak world that you're picturing here. So where does the technical industrial complex come in? And are they now competing with the financial one?
Now there's a power struggle. So people think of a global cabal when I say something like this. It's actually more decentralized than that. It's a power network that changes based upon wealth. So with the rise of China, you had a completely different wealth class. With the rise of the Middle East, you had Muslim wealth. With the rise of India, you had Hindu wealth, connected wealth. And that's why there's so much demographic change in the West. Why? Because the proof of weapons network is partnering with the Gulf countries, with China. Oh, I forgot the BRICS one. So what you'll notice is that they tried to do the single currency was how you get the whole of Europe under one central bank, one unelected power structure that is completely co-opted by the US proof of weapons network. So if you look at UK right now, Keir Starmer is just trying to find another way of saying how we're defending democracy in Ukraine. What does that mean? It means the Bank of England prints money.
Yep.
There's a justification for why we're not helping our homeless people, why the country's getting worse and worse and worse. They send the billions of dollars over to Ukraine. Ukraine is a proxy for the military-industrial complex with Zelensky installed via color revolution. And then that goes up to the US stock market. And then what does Trump do? Trump says, hey, Zelensky, come to the White House. And they manufacture a fake argument, make it look like, we want peace. We're the US. We want peace. You must do peace with Russia and Putin.
But who's manufacturing this? Like, are you saying Trump's manufacturing this?
Who are Trump's backers?
But so someone's telling Trump to manufacture this?
Well, I don't know exactly how the communication works. It normally works through capital flow, signaling. But if you look at Trump, who paid for Trump to be president?
Peter Thiel?
Number one was Elon Musk. Number two was the Bank of New York Mellon family. Number three was Miriam Edelstein, which is an Israel first policy. Remember, Israel is a military-industrial complex proxy for US. It's a plausible deniability story. say it was the Jews. And when we want to divorce from Israel, we just blame Israel, make them out like they're evil. Meanwhile, all the money comes back to the US stock market. Google owns all the companies. Microsoft owns all the companies. Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic. Whenever we want to do something evil that we don't want to be associated, you go do the genocide and you get blamed for it. America's backed every genocide across the world. Like every single genocide from the British Empire to the American Empire has been backed by America, but they do it via proxy. So don't think that what's happening in Palestine is unique. This is just America saying, right, the Middle East is powerful now. I don't think we can do a destabilization campaign. Why? Because the financial industrial complex said, we need to work with the Gulf countries. The Gulf countries is where we're doing all our deal flow. We also need data centers for AI. NVIDIA needs to sell more chips. They're going to sell them to China. They're going to sell them to the Gulf countries. We need to make up for our lost profits. Let's wage war on Europe. Let's make all of our weapon sales by making sure that Russia is continually feeling that they need to. And what do our leaders do? We're about to go to war. We're about to go to war with Russia. Come on. That's a sales strategy by NATO. NATO is a weapons sales organization for the US military industrial complex. How do you steal money from the British and European people, print it, and prop up US GDP? And then you have these arguments where you're like, Zelensky, and then what does Zelensky do? He comes over to Keir Starmer and we all start hugging in London and Europe. We're going to start looking after ourselves, and all the British people. J.D. Vance comes along and said, look at the European Union. You've got no freedom of speech. Your rainbow fairies, your LGBTQ, your climate change. Meanwhile, they profited from all of that. ESG was BlackRock. That was destroy Europe. Europe's being sacrificed for American corporate profits because they're exiting the Middle East. They can't do the forever war model at the moment. So they need to make up for lost revenue.
And that's why they're now turning their attention to Venezuela.
So if you look at America, the goal of strategically weakening the dollar is to split the world up into blocks. So the financial industrial complex said, can we co-opt through BRICS, single currency? It didn't work. But we co-opted European Union through a single currency, because a single currency is complete subordination to the proof of weapons network. Goldman Sachs tried it, it didn't work. And so China set up a network where you could have a credit-based public banking system owned by PBOC. Iran, Russia, anyone, when they want to buy goods, they just have a credit-based system that works outside the dollar system. And then they all started building their own payment networks outside of SWIFT. So India started building it, Brazil started building it, the Gulf countries started building it. All these payment rails are coming online, and they're getting more and more traction. And so you had massive de-dollarization, but in a managed transition, because BlackRock wants the dollar for as long as they can have it. But eventually there's going to be civil unrest when you steal all the assets from all the people. And so they needed a technocratic surveillance state in order to manage the civil unrest they're manufacturing, because they want to buy all the assets. They're buying everything. Blackstone tried to buy Thames Water. Why? Because they need all these resources for their AI and robotic data centers. So the technical industrial complex is in a bit of a power struggle with the financial industrial complex. Why? Because it's kind of getting stable coins. That's a bit interesting. So the bank lobby went nuts and made sure that it stayed within the Fed.
Well,
the
David
Fed
Sachs
system.
even said when the Genius Act passed, he was on all in, and he said the reason they didn't allow interest on stablecoins is specifically because the banks wouldn't allow it.
Absolutely. So that was a bit of a tug of war between, can tech get a bit of power from finance? No, that one didn't work.
But you said something really interesting before, and I interrupted you. You said the technical industrial complex may not need money.
Yes.
How does that work?
Well, what is the future with this artificial intelligence? And this is where it goes to a bit of a wacky conversation where all of our opinions
It's not been wacky yet.
Yeah. But in my book, I actually wrote about a moneyless world. And if you look at different, so, on podcasts, you often see like ex-CIA spills the bean on all of these different NATO operations and aliens are coming down and stuff like that. There's no such thing as ex-CIA. You can't leave the network, you know. Elon, if he tries to leave the network, you know, you're either blackmailed, you lose your money, and then if they need to eliminate you, they Charlie Kirk you.
Yeah.
You know. And so, you know, you can't leave the network. That's the kind of the mafia thing. Once you're in, you're in. Yes. So where does AI take us next? So, and I think there's probably a good time to pivot to Bitcoin after this as well. But the world of artificial intelligence may just be one of those technologies that kind of become self-destructive. And it could break everything. It could completely break everything. You try and put the world on so you're breaking, what's the new model? You're breaking the world into multipolarity. You got the BRICS countries, you got the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you got ASEAN, the Asian countries, you got the GCC. The Gulf countries want to sit between China and America, and they reduce the petrodollar from 100% to 70%, and they're managing it down where it's more the petro yuan. So they can sit 50% petro yuan, petrodollar, and then through the price of oil, they can smash the world if they want, and they get a very powerful position. And so all the banks and BlackRock is now setting up in Real. You know, they're setting up in Saudi Arabia. And you're getting this very different change in world order. Israel has to negotiate. They're turning Gaza into a token so that they can build data centers, tokenizing the land after the genocide. Tony Blair wrote the plan. Like, I went through the whole thing. Like, what they want to build in Gaza is what they want for the rest of the world. Elon Musk has his own data center section. Elon started releasing $7,000 technocratic homes. I used to have a Tesla, and the Tesla told me that I can't drive my car anymore. It's just stuck on my drive. So if your car wants to tell you you're not allowed to drive or send you off a cliff, it can do that.
But why did yours stop driving?
It just stopped driving. I don't know. I still don't know.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's been listening to your podcast.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm get a bit paranoid nowadays, but maybe, just maybe, freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach on the free speech platform might have been a recognition of a new model. That model might have been, I don't know if censorship works anymore. We can't shut them up. So why don't we just get them talking? And then they can tell us everything they really think. And then we can start building all the metadata on everything they really think. And then we can turn that into a social credit score. We won't give them freedom of reach unless they start saying the things we want them to say. Then we'll reward their behavior. If they say the things, they get more shares, more likes, more reach. And so we can gradually change what they say in order to be rewarded by the algorithm.
It's Pavlov's dog.
Exactly. So that's, you know, and then eventually that will be integrated with the currency. Of course, Elon will have one. That's his network. But again, I've lost my train of thought. Where were we going?
My mind is just blowing a little bit here. But I mean, I'm conscious of your time, and we've gone on a very long tangent there, which started at a very interesting tangent, but started at BlackRock coming into Bitcoin.
Yes.
And like taking all that into account, if the IMF and the World Bank see Bitcoin as an actual threat, presumably they'll do anything they can to co-opt it. Do you think they can co-opt Bitcoin?
Okay. I think it's the most decentralized thing we have, and there are multiple operations to co-opt it. Firstly, I do believe that Bitcoin was created by intelligence.
I could see that.
Yeah. And I think it was open sourced as a breakaway from intelligence.
You think this is like NSA or something like that?
Yes. I think it was created by Len Sassaman, Hal Finney, and, you know, I've looked back at those early days and all the people that I knew and all the conversations that I knew. I think it's completely implausible that intelligence don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. And the reason is because it came from the Proof of Weapons network. And so it was a breakaway open source. Just like, what did the British Empire do? It created its colony islands, and it created its tax havens because the rich people want an exit. Okay. So they want everybody to own Bitcoin in custody, but they want to own Bitcoin in self-custody. They want everyone to put their gold in custody, but they want to own the gold custodians so that they control. Okay, so custody becomes the thing. And so I believe that Bitcoin was created as a breakaway from intelligence, and it was open sourced. And the construct of Bitcoin means that you have nodes, miners, and developers, users, other parts of the ecosystem. And I think they created it as this decentralized network. It was a bit of an experiment. And I think we got such a level of hash power, such a level of node adoption, such a level of self-custody, such a level of wallet adoption, that the reason they did it is most people think, why would the NSA create Bitcoin or the CIA create Bitcoin? They normally come up with two theories. Theory one is backdoor. We know that's not true. Anyone that studies the code, there's no backdoor. Like anyone that's been through the block war, you know how hard it is to get consensus on this network. You know, there was every type of, when Barry Silbert tried to take over the network by funding all the companies through VCs and then trying to do SegWit 2X and having secret meetings in Hong Kong that I was at and, you know, funding developers via BitPay and different companies. We've seen it all before.
And this is why it doesn't matter if it came out of the NSA.
Because open source code, as long as we maintain the integrity of Bitcoin improvement proposals, GitHub, competing implementations. That's why I think Knots versus Core is important. These different things are important. As long as we maintain countries that hate each other mining, like we used to have a centralization of mining in China problem. We now have a centralization of mining in America problem.
I'm sure there's still mining going on in China.
There is. You know, the data we have is about 21% in China and 40% in America. Now, that is across public companies. Public companies are all co-optable into the proof of weapons network. So they launched Strategy. Strategy is their perfect tool for market manipulation of Bitcoin. How do you get as much Bitcoin in a corporate treasury company? You got 650,000 in. How do you then ratchet up the debt instruments so they become subordinate to the corporate debt investors? And then how do you make a scenario where the dividends supersede the revenue, the cash in the bank? And then you're either forced to raise finance, which is raise finance means subordination to the proof of weapons network, the important nodes being BlackRock, JP Morgan, various others. You then blackmail them to try and get them into the index funds. You create massive market manipulation. You eventually get it into the S&P 500 because strategy as a tool to the proof of weapons network is way more useful than making it go down or putting it in chapter 11. Because it is a tool to centralize as much Bitcoin as possible. If strategy could, it would centralize 21 million Bitcoin through debt instruments and the debt capital markets and the equity. That's the goal of the company. How do I use the equity capital markets and the debt capital markets, which is the proof of weapons network, to get as much Bitcoin in a corporate structure where those from the index funds get the board seat, and you get the passive inflow, which means you have debt instruments and equity instruments. They did a brilliant job with strategy. Bitcoin ETF, we know that came from Operation Chokepoint 2.0. I was involved in the Celsius bankruptcy. That was an Israeli operation. If you look at some of the hacks that happened there, one of them was a company called Bancor DAO. So you put Bitcoin in there, and then you were mixed with all sorts of shit coins. One of the company was Bancor DAO. The shareholder of Bancor DAO was the niece and nephew of Benjamin Netanyahu. Alex Majinsky was ex-IDF. His co-founder, Daniel Leone, he got away. He didn't get in prison. And he's in Israel right now doing an AI startup with the Prime Minister's Office of Israel. His wife was head of loans and VP, and she was the one that was issuing all of the loans. She's now head of social media for propaganda for the IDF. And the custody happened through GK8, different types of Israeli intelligence operations. You can look at SBF and FTX. What went away? All of the political campaign financing, that all went away. We don't want to look there. Don't want to look at any of that stuff. Sullivan and Cromwell was on the board. That's the CIA's law firm. SBF was the only one that got a meeting with Gary Gensler. Here's the important thing to understand. The Fed is for the banks, pretending it's for Congress and president. The government is lobby. They're both owned by banks. So you've got monetary policy, fiscal policy, and regulations through these blackmail operations. Same thing. So it's completely co-opted as a technocratic Orwellian nightmare system in the name of democracy, making you think that something's about to change if you go left, right, and focus on LGBTQ or women in sports or things like that.
So if you think that self-custody is going to be under attack in Bitcoin, do you think Bitcoin wins that fight?
I do, yes. I think the elites want self-custody. And so the reason that they allowed the tax haven islands, the Cayman Islands and Isle of Man, is because the rich want them. They want Bitcoin in self-custody.
Because that's really the only potential regulation that could really hamper Bitcoin is the idea of making holding your own Bitcoin illegal.
Yeah. So when Trump said, I want to be crypto capital of the world, he looked at every single case and said, well, pardon Ross Ulbright, honeypot. Ross Ulbright was a honeypot. The CZ bought his pardon because he funneled billions of dollars into the UAE Qatari funds. But the one case that remains was Samurai Wallet, which was the self-custody case, the CoinJoin case, the privacy case.
Which did start under Biden.
Yeah, started under Biden. But they looked through all the cases and said, we'll keep that one. And he's now in prison.
I mean, he couldn't pardon them before he went to court either, could he?
I don't know the process of what he could go through. I just think it's interesting that under the Trump administration, in the crypto capital of the world, we've got a crypto nightmare. We've got no Bitcoin strategic reserves other than confiscation, which they stole from the people. By the way, I want those 117,000 Bitcoin back. I was a shareholder in Bitfinex. The DOJ ruled that they belong to Bitfinex. I'm a shareholder in Bitfinex. They stole them.
Do you think there's any chance they do get those back?
I thought they were definitely getting them back.
I thought they'd get them back.
We were celebrating as shareholders. Now they're on the Bitcoin strategic reserve balance sheet. China tried to give back the 127,000 Bitcoin that was stolen from a scam in Cambodia, and America added them to their balance sheet. And so the Bitcoin strategic reserve is confiscation. The executive order was similar language to what they used in 33 confiscation. I'm not saying they're going to do this. Why? Because government's not going to. The banks don't want more power to government. They would rather in strategy, centralisation, ETFs. That's what they want. They want as much in Wall Street. They want as much in the financial industrial complex. And they want their vehicle for manipulating the short-term price of Bitcoin. And then what do they want you to do? They want you all to custody with them. And they want banks to use it as leverage. And they want you to borrow against it so that they can custody it. And so the resistance against this is what the elites say for themselves, just like they saved the tax haven islands for themselves. They saved self-custody Bitcoin for themselves.
But you don't think Bitcoin will take down this industrial complex?
No. Bitcoin is an exit and a boycott. The financial industrial complex is already moving on to the next order. It's already said we want multipolarity. We're strategically taking down the Japan carry trade. They got the Bank of Japan to put rates up. They waged war with Europe to break the euro dollar. They started, if you look at, since Dollar Liberation Day, which was Trump tariffs, BlackRock tariffs, BlackRock wanted tariffs to reset the world order. And Trump was installed in order to deliver it and give a MAGA narrative with his cult following. But it was, what did tariffs do? It was a tax on the American people. The American corporation. If it led to inflation, it would have been a hidden tax on the American people. So the 350 billion, that came from small business. That was a COVID operation. M&A activity in America went through the roof. All the small businesses went bankrupt, up to the global multinational institution. What about the export-dependent countries like Vietnam and everyone? They started having bankruptcies. They were acquired. BlackRock, the Gulf countries, China started negotiating all the different ports around the world based upon the export-dependent countries. America, who used to protect all the seas, is being shrunk into a regional power, and China published $1 trillion trade surplus, the highest it's ever been. Everyone started negotiating with China. And then Trump, what does he do? He said, we're taking on the deep state. What does taking on the deep state mean? Deconstructing the deep state operations that propped up the dollar. USAID was how they did those color revolutions. That's how they did those covert wars. You take them away, you weaken the dollar. And now what happens? You say, we're coming after the Christians in Nigeria, when Muslims and Christians are being killed by Boko Haram, which is funded by intelligence operations. And so you pretend you're coming up helping the Christians, but what are you doing if you're the Nigerian leader? You're saying, all right, all my business is coming from China. All my revenue is coming from China. America says they're going to come in. You start negotiating eastwards. Mm-hmm. And so Trump is an agent of chaos to make it look like white nationalism while all of these demographic changes are happening. And the algorithm is fueling Jew hatred, Muslim hatred, left hatred, radical left, radical right, far right dictators. The algorithms are feeding us hate in order to manufacture the civil unrest because they want the surveillance state, the pre-crime agenda, everything they beta tested around the world. Because once you split the world up into blocks, you then have a go at your one world currency. ChatGPT went along and said, hey, Sam Altman, you think this guy created ChatGPT? This is all Pentagon technology. Google, Apple, Steve Wozniak used Hewlett-Packard's technology. You think Hewlett-Packard said, yeah, go create Apple? No, these were all DARPA funded. These are all Pentagon budgets, theft from the American people, privatization, and you get to steal the budgets, the money printing of the debt-based Ponzi scheme. You reallocate fiat currency into stocks and assets, and then you end up with all the hard money at the end of it. And that's what they're doing. And suddenly we get this gold burst. Suddenly we get this silver burst. Suddenly we get Bitcoin not going along with it while they're trying to centralize as much of it as they can.
Man, Simon, this is a bleak. I don't know how else to describe it.
It's not bleak
scary.
unless you believe in Western dominance. If you're African, you're thinking for the first time in history, I'm going to be able to use my resources. And I don't get to be, we actually get to use our resources. If you're Asian, you're saying this is the rise of the global South. If you're Middle Eastern, you're saying, wow, we're going to have decolonization. The forever war's over. Like China normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Trump is pretending that he's trying to wage war on Iran.
Yeah.
That 12-day war was a manufactured war. It was complete theater. Complete theater. Everyone got to walk away with what they wanted to walk away with. The IRGC, which, by the way, the enemy between Iran and Israel, that's an operation. Like, this helps the military-industrial complex at the highest levels. You got to read Operation Gladio. They have these things called strategic tension. You manufacture fake enemies, and then everybody benefits from the fallout. Qatar, like Hamas, wasn't even funded by Iran. They say it's Iran-backed proxy. It was funded by Qatar. Qatar is a US ally. Hamas's office is in Doha, in Qatar. The only way to get money into the Palestinian banking system is via the Israeli banking system. If you want to get it via cash, then you have to go via Egypt. Egypt is funded by USAID, and then you get it in. Are you saying the most sophisticated intelligence network in the world, Mossad, had an illegal occupation where every single device of every single people is monitored, and it is a laboratory for surveillance technology, that they just accidentally built a tunnel network and over 30 years, and Israel just didn't know it was there?
Of course not.
And suddenly they got over the border and we're told all of this bullshit that didn't happen about mass sexual violence. This was an operation, to reset the order, to destroy Palestine, rebuild it as a laboratory for what they want to do around the rest of the world. Now, we say it's bleak. You just got to know the enemy. So the West is being sacrificed, certainly is, because it's owned by the proof of weapons network. The rest of the world gets to rise. The ones that have the sovereign wealth, we get to move into a more, rather than dollar-dominated hegemon, we get currency, and all the wars are currency wars right now. That's not World War III. That's a good thing. I genuinely don't believe we're moving to World War III because we're seeing these currency wars instead. These are economic wars. These are being settled and resolved. But what does the world look like under a multipolar world with multiple currencies? Hard money. And so
that's a good thing.
It's a Bitcoin world. Mm-hmm. It's a gold world. It's a commodities world. We just need to understand the battle. Stop engaging in the political process. So how do you actually, let's leave something positive. How do you actually fight this system? Well, the power structure of the existing currency is the Federal Reserve. If you want to boycott the Federal Reserve,
buy Bitcoin.
Buy Bitcoin. If you want to boycott the proof of weapons network, which the current CEO, because they manage about $12 trillion of assets, is BlackRock. If you want to buy BlackRock, don't buy the Bitcoin ETF. If you want to boycott the banks because they get to create the fiat currency, don't borrow against your Bitcoin. Don't mine fiat currency by putting it in custody and borrowing against it. If you can find a self-custody structure, then beat the system, fine. What if you want to boycott the military industrial complex, technical industrial complex, and financial industrial complex? Don't buy the S&P. Invest local. Invest in your local farmers. Purchase from local. Guess what? It's not poisoned either. The things that they want you to do are the opposite of what you should be doing. You should be eating good food. They even put you in this soya, psyop, vegan thing. Eat fresh meat from farmers. Purchase from local supply chains. Build your own communities, because in a world where the government is being asset stripped in the West, which it is, this isn't getting better. I promise you, this isn't getting better. This gets worse for the West. You don't get to rage wars around the world, rape, pillage, destroy, and not have that come home in the end. And that's the reality. So people then decide where they want to live. And I think it should all be about safety, where you can self-custody, and the rich want that. And the good thing is that Bitcoin generated wealth, unfortunately, is not very distributed. So doing podcasts like this, get as many people to self-custody. That's why I'm still here. I could have stopped a long time ago. Bitcoin gave me everything I wanted. I've already put my plan together 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Bitcoin gave me what I wanted in 2015, and I prepared this a long time ago. But it's going to be the Bitcoiners, the hard asset people, they're the next elites. And how do you control politics? By being rich. So that's it. For me, boycott the system. Boycott is the ultimate thing. You vote with your money, not with your politicians. Don't vote. Don't even engage in politics. Don't touch it. They do not control everything. They are subordinate to financial interest. If you want to change a company, coordinate a share price, coordinated action. Starbucks had to get rid of their CEO because the Malaysian people stopped shopping at Starbucks. It impacted the share price 10%, and they had to stop funding Israeli settlements. Boycott is the thing, and the ultimate boycott is Bitcoin and self-custody. And fortunately, if you just own more Bitcoin each month and you commit to that for a minimum of 4 years, which is the same thing I've been saying since $3, every single person in the world that's done that has been in a significantly better financial position. They beat JP Morgan, they beat Jamie Dimon, they beat the fund managers, they beat Larry Fink, they beat Peter Thiel, they beat all of them, in terms of if you were just putting that in the S&P 500.
Yeah.
So that's it.
It's an easy playbook. You just got to follow it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're still here. This has been a trip. We should probably do this again at some point, but I've really enjoyed that.
Danny, thank you very much. And yeah, I think we got distracted a lot, but it is in the end a Bitcoin story. But I actually think if you really understand Bitcoin, probably 95% of your time is understanding things that aren't Bitcoin.
Totally. And there was some distractions in there, but they were good distractions. We went down some interesting rabbit holes there. So Simon, thank you, man. I really appreciate you coming to do this. And where do you want anyone to go who's listening to this?
So yeah, I managed to sell off my business to Coinbase. I sold off as many of my shareholdings because the companies go public. I still got like about 100 of them from this journey, but all of the Bitcoin companies ended up shitcoin companies. What I tend to do as a discipline, I go live on YouTube, Simon Dixon, and I do 3 hours. 1 hour this week in Bitcoin and tech and everything that happened this week. 1 hour Bitcoin this week in macro, and 1 hour this week in geopolitics. And I do it where I completely ignore everything that's in the media and just follow the financial flows to get a completely different story. And I publish in real time on X as a discipline. So at Simon Dixon Twit. And if I get taken down, I set up my own server and LLM structure and decentralized network on simondixon.com.
Very cool. Well, Simon, this has been great. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.